13 armed hunters entered the Louisiana swamp in the summer of 1872. By the end of that week, not one of them came back out. No bodies, no witnesses, no explanation. Only a single message left at the edge of the Basin Road. 4 words. The account is settled. The man who sent those hunters was Colonel Augustine Belair, the richest planter in St. Mary Parish, a man who had spent 30 years buying judges, deputies, and politicians, a man who believed there was no problem in Louisiana that money could not solve. So when a freed black man named Judah Cain began burning his sugar fields, organizing freed communities, and teaching workers to refuse plantation contracts, Belair decided the problem needed to disappear. He placed a bounty on Judah Cain's head, $1,500, paid to whoever could bring him back dead. To collect it, Belair hired the best manhunter he could find, Calhoun Rast, 14 years in the trade, 5 states, dozens of fugitives captured, and not a single failed hunt. Rast assembled 12 men, war veterans, trackers, killers, men who believed no one could hide forever. On a Monday morning in August, 13 armed riders entered the Atchafalaya Basin to hunt one man. What they did not understand was that the man they were hunting had spent 17 years turning that swamp into something no outsider could survive. And by the time the hunters realized the truth, the basin had already closed behind them. But the story did not begin with the bounty. It began years earlier, with a debt. Dawn came slowly to the Louisiana sugar country that morning, heavy, reluctant. The kind of August dawn that feels less like sunlight and more like pressure settling over the land. Mist clung to the cypress trees. Spanish moss hung motionless above the water. Even the birds seemed quiet, as if the basin itself was holding its breath. At the eastern edge of the swamp, an old man named Jeremiah Cain sat outside his cabin. A fishing line rested loosely across his knee. A Bible lay open on the small wooden table beside him. Jeremiah had already been awake for more than an hour, watching the basin road through a narrow gap in the cabin wall. He had watched that road every morning for 7 years, long enough to know every patrol horse by its gait, every overseer by the way he carried a rifle, every bounty rider by the silence that followed behind him. That morning, he heard the horses before he saw them. 13 riders, heavy in the saddle, moving with the confidence of men who believed the road belonged to them. Jeremiah did not turn around. He did not need to. He simply counted the hoofbeats in the dirt. 1, 4, 8. 13. By the time the last horse passed the cabin, word was already moving through the basin, quietly, quickly, from one settlement to the next. Because the people living along that road understood something the hunters did not. No one entered the Atchafalaya Basin without being seen, and no one hunted Judah Cain without him knowing about it first. Jeremiah rose slowly from his chair. His knees protested in the damp morning air the way they always did, but his hands were steady. He stepped inside the cabin, opened his Bible, and turned to a page he had already marked, Psalm 23. He read the first line quietly. Then he placed the book flat in the center of the table, exactly where someone else would expect to find it. Outside, the sound of the riders faded into the swamp, and somewhere deep inside the Atchafalaya Basin, a man named Judah Cain already knew the hunt had begun. The debt came in the spring of 1866, 1 year after the war ended. 1 year after men like Jeremiah Cain were told they were finally free. A rider from Colonel Belaire's plantation brought the paper, folded once, stamped with Belaire's seal. It said Jeremiah Cain owed $43.70, feed costs, housing costs, tool maintenance, all calculated from the year before emancipation. The numbers were written in Belaire's ledger, witnessed by Belaire's overseer, signed in Belaire's own hand. $43.70. For a wealthy planter, it was nothing. For a newly freed man with no savings, it might as well have been 40,000. Jeremiah read the paper twice. Then he folded it again, slowly, carefully, because he understood exactly what it meant. This was not a debt. It was a chain. 2 weeks later, he rode back to Belaire's plantation. There was no other choice. Every road that did not lead there led somewhere worse. For 14 months, Jeremiah worked the same fields he had worked as a slave. The same overseer. The same cane rows stretching to the horizon. The only difference was the ledger. Every week the book said he owed slightly less. And every week Belaire added something new. Food, tools, housing, interest. The number never reached zero. $43, 41, 44, 42 again. The debt moved in a circle with no exit. Jeremiah never spoke about it to his son. He did not need to. In southern Louisiana, information moved faster than the law. And Judah Cain learned about the debt on a Tuesday. 3 weeks later, Colonel Belaire's eastern sugar field burned to the ground. The fire started the first night of harvest. Clean, fast, total. By morning, nothing remained but black soil and twisted iron. No witnesses, no suspects, no explanation. Belaire rebuilt the following year. The next harvest burned too. After that, something changed in the basin. Freed workers stopped signing Belaire's labor contracts. Small settlements began sharing supplies. Night riders stopped passing through certain roads. And somewhere inside the Atchafalaya Basin, a man named Judah Cain began building something no plantation owner understood. It started with the water. The swamp was a maze of channels and cypress roots. Miles of black water that looked identical to anyone who had not grown up inside it. Judah had grown up inside it. He knew which waterways looped back on themselves, which mud banks would swallow a horse, which patches of ground looked solid and were not. So he began to change the swamp, slowly, patiently, over many years. He moved submerged roots to redirect current, cut false trails through marsh grass, built hidden walkways beneath the waterline. He carved channels that led hunters in circles, paths that seemed real until they ended in deep black water. 7 safe houses appeared across the basin, none visible from open water, none reachable without knowing the exact entry point. Signals traveled through the swamp. Bird calls, ripple patterns in the water, bent reeds placed in quiet arrangements along narrow channels. Information moved across 3 parishes in less than an hour. Most of the people carrying those signals did not even realize they were part of something larger. They simply helped a man who had helped them before. And by the time Colonel Belaire placed $1,500 on Judah Cain's head, the swamp was no longer just wilderness. It was a system, a network, a territory. And every mile of it belonged to Judah. Calhoun Rast knew something was wrong before noon on the first day. Not wrong in the way a trail sometimes fades. Not the kind of mistake a map occasionally makes. Something deeper. The map Belair had given him showed a wide channel running north, a clean path through the basin, deep enough for boats, shallow enough for horses. What Rast found instead was a wall of cypress roots and black water. The channel ended after 200 yards, like the swamp itself had decided the map was lying. Rast stood there a long moment, studying the water. Then he turned his horse around without saying a word. A good hunter did not announce problems to the men following him. Confidence was a tool, and tools were not wasted. The party moved deeper into the basin. The sun disappeared behind the cypress canopy within the first mile. After that, every direction looked the same. Dark water, gray trunks, Spanish moss hanging like curtains. One of the men checked his compass. Another swore the current was moving the wrong way. A third began marking trees with his knife. Rast said nothing. He watched the water. Water always told the truth, but in the Atchafalaya Basin, even the water seemed to hesitate. By afternoon the men had stopped joking. Their voices lowered without anyone giving the order. Their horses moved more carefully through the shallows. The swamp absorbed sound in a strange way. A man speaking 20 feet away sometimes sounded distant. Other times a whisper carried farther than it should. One of the veterans noticed first, a man named Briggs, former Confederate infantry, a tracker who had spent 2 years hunting deserters through Tennessee hills. Briggs kept looking over his shoulder, not searching for someone behind them, just making sure the world still behaved the way he expected. It did not. Rast made camp that night on the highest ground he could find, a narrow ridge barely above the waterline. Defensible, dry enough for a fire. 2 guards posted, rotating watch, rifles ready. The men slept badly. The swamp never truly went quiet. Water shifted, branches creaked. Something moved in the darkness beyond the firelight. At 2 in the morning, one of the guards heard footsteps in the water. Slow, careful. 30 yards from camp. He woke the second guard. Both men raised their rifles. Both men stared into the darkness. The water was empty, still, black. They watched for 4 minutes. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing existed there at all. But the guard knew what he had heard. Something had been there, and whatever it was, had already moved on. Morning came gray and damp. Rast sent his lead tracker ahead, a man named Webb, thin, quiet, the best ground reader in the party. Webb moved 40 yards ahead of the group, crouching often, studying mud, broken reeds, tiny disturbances along the waterline. He followed a faint trail along the edge of a narrow channel. Boot marks, bent grass, signs of a man trying not to leave signs. Webb knelt beside a patch of disturbed mud, studying it carefully, reading the ground like a page. The others waited behind him, watching. Then Webb stepped off the trail. Just one step, toward a bird call in the trees. A yellow-crowned night heron, a common sound in the basin. Nothing unusual. Webb disappeared into the cypress roots. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. Rast checked the sun, waited. 20 minutes later, Webb had still not returned. Rast sent 2 men to retrieve him, Briggs and another hunter named Collier. They followed Webb's path into the trees, called his name once, then again. They returned 8 minutes later, alone. They had found the place where Webb had knelt, the disturbed mud, his knee prints, the pivot mark from his boot, then nothing, no trail leading away. No broken branches, no splash in the water. The ground simply ended, as if Webb had been standing there one moment, and then ceased to exist the next. Rast stared at the empty ground for a long time. For the first time since entering the basin, something shifted behind his calm expression. Something small, but permanent. Because Calhoun Rast finally understood something important. He was not hunting a man. He was moving through someone else's territory. And somewhere inside that swamp, the hunt had already begun. The second man disappeared that night. No gunshot, no shout, no struggle. Just absence. The guard on watch swore he had seen the man sitting beside the fire only minutes earlier, cleaning his rifle, muttering something about mosquitoes. Then he looked again, and the man was gone. At first the others assumed he had stepped away. Men sometimes wandered from camp at night to relieve themselves, to clear their heads, but 5 minutes passed, then 10. No footsteps. No movement in the water. No voice answering when they called his name. Rast stood up slowly, his eyes moved across the dark water surrounding their camp. Something in the swamp had changed. He could feel it. The basin was no longer watching them. Now it was moving. Morning revealed nothing, no footprints leaving camp, no drag marks. No broken branches. Only the quiet certainty that another man was gone. 11 hunters had entered the swamp, now there were 9. Fear began to move through the group. Not loudly. Men like these did not panic with shouting, their fear was quieter. Tighter. Long silences, hands resting closer to rifle grips. Eyes searching shadows that had been empty the day before. Rast forced them forward. Stopping meant admitting the hunt had turned against them, and Calhoun Rast had built his reputation on never turning back. By midday the fog rolled in. Slow at first, thin strands drifting between the cypress trunks, then thicker, lower, until the world closed around them in gray silence. Visibility dropped to 15 feet, maybe less. Shapes became shadows, shadows became threats. Rast made the decision that afternoon, split the party, 4 men with him, for with Briggs, they would sweep the basin in parallel lines. Half a mile apart. Driving Judah Cain into the narrowing space between them. It was good military logic, used in forests and mountains across 2 wars. But the Atchafalaya Basin was not a forest, and it was not a mountain. It was Judah Cain's home. The 2 groups moved through the fog, slow, careful, listening, then someone heard it. Movement in the water ahead, a careful splash, then silence. Exactly the sound a hunted man makes when he believes someone is close. Rast's group turned toward it, rifles raised, hearts hammering. Half a mile away. Briggs's group heard the same sound. The fog carried it sideways through the swamp, distorting distance, changing direction. Both groups believed they were closing in on Judah Cain. Neither group realized they were closing in on each other. Briggs stepped through a bank of fog first, for dark shapes moved in the water ahead, men with rifles. Someone fired. No one ever agreed who pulled the trigger first. Gunshots exploded through the fog. 1, 2, 3, then many more. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Rifles flashed in the white mist. 40 seconds later, the shooting stopped. 2 men floated face down in the black water. Neither one was Judah Cain. Rast stood there breathing hard, looking at the bodies, looking at the men who had fired the shots. No one spoke. No one needed to.
The hunters had just killed their own. 4 men remained, including Rast. Somewhere deep in the swamp, Cain watched the smoke drift through the cypress trees, and marked another step closer to the end.
By the morning of the 5th day, Calhoun Rast had 4 men left. 4 men, 2 days of supplies, no tracker, and a map he had already stopped trusting. But turning back was no longer possible. Not for a man like Rast. 14 years without a failed hunt. He had built his name on that fact. And men like Calhoun Rast did not survive by admitting defeat. They survived by pushing forward. The cabin appeared just after sunrise, a small wooden structure standing on dry ground at the edge of a narrow channel. Smoke rising slowly from the chimney, a lamp burning faintly in the window. Rast stopped immediately, raised one hand. His men spread out around the structure. Left flank, right flank, rear. Everything about the cabin felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. But it was the first solid thing they had seen in 5 days. Rast moved toward the door, rifle raised, heart steady. He kicked the door open and stepped inside. Fast, violent, ready for a fight. Instead, he found an old man sitting at a table, Cain. A Bible lay open in front of him. A single candle burned beside the pages. Jeremiah did not look frightened, he did not move, he simply finished reading the line in front of him. Then he lifted his eyes, and looked directly at Calhoun Rast. Rast crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed the old man by his collar. "Where is he?" Jeremiah studied him quietly, almost kindly. "You must be Mr. Rast. My son said you would come." Rast tightened his grip. "Where is Cain?" Jeremiah answered with 7 calm words. "He already knows you're here, Mr. Rast." The fire began instantly. All 4 walls ignited at the same moment. Kerosene lines Judah had laid over 3 nights caught flame in a single violent flash. Fire raced along the walls, across the ceiling, through the doorway. The cabin became an oven of heat and smoke. Rast released Jeremiah and turned for the door. His men shouted outside. Someone fired a rifle blindly into the trees. And then Cain came through the wall. Not through the door. Through a loose panel he had prepared days earlier. He moved like something the swamp had built itself. Silent. Precise. Certain. What followed inside the burning cabin lasted less than 4 minutes. It was not a fight, it was an ending. Every movement Judah made connected to the next. Knife, smoke, confusion, firelight. The hunters had come searching for a man. What they found instead was the trap he had built for them. 30 seconds before the roof collapsed, a hidden panel opened at the back of the cabin. Cyprian Fontenot pulled Jeremiah through the opening. Clean, fast, practiced. They disappeared into the swamp without a sound. Only one man walked out of the burning cabin, Cain. He stood at the edge of the water and watched the fire consume the structure. Roof first. Then the walls collapsing inward. The swamp slowly returned to silence. Birds, insects. The sound of water moving through cypress roots. Calhoun Rast and his hunters were gone. All 13 of them. 3 weeks later, federal marshals arrived at Colonel Augustine Belaire's plantation. They carried warrants signed in New Orleans, backed by documents Belaire believed had been destroyed. Payment records. Illegal labor contracts, orders authorizing violence against freed settlements. 30 years of crimes preserved in careful handwriting. Belaire stood on his gallery as they read the charges. Still dressed in his morning coat. Still holding his bourbon glass. For the first time in his life, money could not solve the problem in front of him. He held out his wrists without speaking. Cain returned to the basin 3 days later. Before dawn. The way he always moved. His mother opened the door before he knocked. She had been listening for his footsteps since the fire. 5 marks were carved into the doorframe, one for each day of the hunt. She touched his face with both hands. Neither of them spoke. Some victories do not need words. Later that morning, Cain sat beside the water with his fishing line. A Bible rested in his coat pocket. An overseer rode past on the basin road. He saw an old freedman fishing. Nothing more. Jeremiah watched the water and read Psalm 23 to the end. Deep inside the Atchafalaya Basin, Cain moved silently through the black water. The swamp closed behind him, keeping its secrets, just as it always had.